All right, here we are at another episode of Flipping Houses for Rookies. Yay!
Good morning to Bill from Florida.
Good morning to the world from Florida.
Yeah.
Bill's planet has shifted. The axis has shifted from Connecticut to Florida. All right, we're on episode number 278. 278. The name of today's podcast is Never Revealed Before Today. Savvy, creative real estate deal structuring. I'll have you know that I really, in case you didn't hear me, really? enjoyed writing this podcast. This is one of my favorites.
You've been holding out on us.
Yeah,
Never revealed. You've been holding out on us.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's that. It's probably newly discovered instead of newly. Actually, it's been there all along. I just noticed it recently.
Cool.
All right, here's a description. Even though I rant on and on and on about finding motivated sellers, trick there is finding motivated sellers all the time, plus preach if you talk to enough new sellers, sooner or later, you will find a seller that doesn't say no to anything you want to do. Which, by the way, that's the true definition of a motivated seller. They don't say no. Okay?
Yeah.
The deal will eventually elevate to having some sort of a deal structure or doing deal structuring. And having spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours doing seminars and teaching how I do this, today is different. In this podcast, I'm going to strip down exactly what is going through my head while looking at a deal and trying to structure it so everyone involved wins. And believe it or not, one of my private coaching students brought this to light. So I decided to do this podcast on the simple way that I'm looking at deals and spit out offers like Henry Ford's assembly line back in the day. In fact, this one podcast doesn't hit you. If this one podcast doesn't hit you on the forehead like a sledgehammer, I may have to give up my teaching career. Only because I don't believe I can make it any simpler for you than I will today. So let's dig in.
So I noticed two things. We're going to be in your head, so I'm scared.
Yeah.
And then we're going to get to the bottom of it.
That's even a noisier conversation.
Oh, well, no, but really, when you get to the bottom of something, like I think I know what you're talking about because we ran into this actually really recently.
Yeah.
It really is like, oh, that's it. You know, when you've hit bottom, like, yeah, you do that and you do that.
You mean basic.
Basic. And, you know, at the very beginning, the home plate is home plate. You know, it doesn't get more home than that.
Yeah.
Anyway, go for it. Tell us.
So before I get started, let's do some housekeeping tasks. Number one, there's a link in the description recently, like the last, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 podcasts. Every week or every podcast has a different link in it, and I put some pretty good surprises in there, so you should go check it out. And the links are relevant to the conversation in the podcast. So in this particular case, towards the end of the show, we're going to talk about documents. So there's a link in there so you can go see all my documents. Okay.
Yep.
Also, we have been, depending on what's going on, for the most case, we record this podcast on Thursday mornings, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we live stream to Facebook and YouTube, Twitter too, but I don't think many people listen on Twitter. And the reason why I tell you that is if you have questions or would like to talk to us during the podcast, if you go to YouTube or if you go to Facebook and you actually type in Flipping Houses for Rookies, you'll find us and you can ask questions there. I have a screen in front of me, and when you ask questions, I'll be able to answer them live on the podcast. And then the last thing is make sure you subscribe to us either on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're going to listen to us, because then when we go live, we'll pop up and we're there. As well as give us reviews. I mean, we obviously love reviews. We have on the podcast a lot of reviews. I have even more reviews or testimonials on my website. I've got a lot of them there too. So thanks for listening. Thanks for all your support. And here we go. So Peter.
Yes, sir.
First off, I want to give thanks and credit to my coaching client from my Israel group. His name is Matt, and is a great client. He challenges me all the time, and vice versa. I challenge him. There are times where it's very frustrating for me, and I'm sure for him too, but the end result is always something good. He's an IT guy, like an internet guy, so he's pretty sharp. And he made this observation. Now, he made the observation on a loose conversation, and me being who I am, I dug into it, started thinking about it for a few days, and here we are. It was an observation I hadn't made, but he kind of like triggered it, and it gave me a different way to look at things. And because of that, like I said, here we are. It's a new concept that we can talk about. So the story was, I was on a coaching call doing deal structuring, and Matt made a very simple observation that stopped me in my tracks. In fact, it was so simple, I didn't even realize I was doing it. And here it is. I look at what I think I can get from the buyer or income before I make an offer with the seller. I didn't realize I was doing that. I had said to you in several podcasts prior to, which is 100% correct. We're going to cover that towards the end of this podcast. But I had mentioned to you multiple times that when I'm doing deal structuring, I'm looking at the paperwork.
Yes.
Right. And I kind of wind my way into the signing of the paperwork. What I didn't realize is it was even simpler than that. What I'm looking at is how am I gonna meet the obligations of this deal? Like, how am I gonna sell it?
Like the exit strategy.
Yeah. Well, it's more than that, and that's what we're gonna cover today. So let's just dig. So simply,
because you hear people say that you have to know your exit strategy, but you got more than that. It's more detailed.
Yeah. Well, exit strategy is a buzzword. So I'm not happy with that because I don't know if people actually know what that means. Okay.
Yeah.
So simply put, once I think I know how much I can sell for, it's a lot easier to know how much I can pay, right? So if I have the money, it's kind of like Christmas shopping. If you have a budget and you know how much you want to spend with each person, it's a lot easier to shop, right?
Sure.
Because you have some sort of guidelines, as I call it very often, the velvet ropes. Like the in the nightclub late at night, there's velvet ropes out front, and you can only go one way. That's forward or backwards. You can't go left or right. It's kind of hard to get, distracted from getting into the club, right? So, yeah.
Sorry, I got this image like at that time of the night. I used to work clubs as a musician. Yeah. Like at that time of the night, they're too drunk. They need the velvet ropes.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got this image.
Totally. So what I'm looking at or thinking about in my mind when I'm doing the deal structuring is how can I sell this deal?
Yeah.
Right. This is the basic idea. Now let's go over the formula I use to get my numbers.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to say, well, how can I sell it? But it's another thing like, okay, there's so many strategies. Which one am I going to use? So, like I said, in deal structuring, it's been backwards. It's been backwards. All these podcasts that, and I didn't realize this. It's been backwards. So what I'm saying is let's start with the income first. So this is kind of like, to divert a little bit, this is kind of like, and this is what made me click all this together. After Matt said that, I had somebody ask me a question, which is a common question. So what happens is you're talking to a subject to deal owner. So you're explaining the subject to deal, which simply means that they're gonna put the deed in your name, and the mortgage is going to stay in the seller's name until you can pay it off, right? And at first, that sounds dangerous, and most people think, "Oh my God, why would somebody do that?" But if you understand the deal structure and you explain it the way we do it, we actually put it into a trust, and we own the trust and all that kind of stuff, right? It's actually the safest way in the world of all the strategy we have. It's actually the safest way for the seller, because we can't just walk away from the deal so easily, right?
Yeah.
So here's the number one question. So if I keep the mortgage in my name, how do I get another mortgage later? If I want to buy another house, how do I get another mortgage?
Sure.
And the rebuttal answer, or the question, the response to that question, okay, is always the same, right? And the rebuttal is, well, that's because you're just thinking of the debt. You're not thinking of the income.
Sure.
So you're just, when you apply for a new mortgage, you're just thinking of the debt to income ratio with the lender. So do you have enough income to support both payments? In other words, the new payment for the new loan and the payment for the old house. And the way you handle that is that we actually provide documents saying that we're making those payments, right? So what happens is you actually change their balance sheet, their debt to income ratio, because if we're paying $1,500 a month and they have a $1,500 a month mortgage, on their income statement, they're going to show the $1,500 we're paying the mortgage company directly as income.
Right. So it evens out.
So it washes out and it doesn't show, right? So this is what it's like with our entrepreneurs, our real estate entrepreneurs, is it's the same thing, just like the seller. They're constantly thinking about just the debt side. They're not thinking about the income side.
Right.
And it doesn't balance out. So it's very difficult for people to make deal structures, because they always have that little fear mongerer in the back of their mind saying, oh boy, you shouldn't do that. You're committing yourself to blah, blah, blah. Right?
Yeah. How are you going to pay for it?
Right.
Yeah.
And if you start on the other side of the coin, from the income side of the coin, and then reverse your way and reverse engineer it into the deal, it's a whole different ballgame. Okay. So no secret here, except I am going to elaborate on this a little bit, because I don't think we've done enough of this. The formula is money now, money monthly, money later. Okay. I didn't make that up. I probably got it from Ron LeGrand. He doesn't say money now. He says profit now, or whatever he says. He says it a little different, but it's an interesting concept, right? So what that means is like money now, right? So we're talking to a seller trying to structure a deal, and we're thinking about money now, money monthly, money later. Okay. So money now is usually your buyer's non-refundable option deposit. That's typically 3 to 5% of the price of the house. And we want to get to 3 to 5% because we're eventually going to get them an FHA mortgage. And FHA requires, I think FHA requires 3 or 3.5%. I always go for 5%.
Sure.
Then I got enough money in the deal, right?
Yeah, you got a little margin there, right?
So we want to make sure that the buyer has that money in the till, so when we go get an FHA mortgage later on, we don't have to struggle with getting more money. We're just dealing with whatever issues like credit repair or tax returns or debt to income ratio or all that stuff, right? We don't have to worry about the chunk of dough, because they're going to give that to us when they move in.
Right, and that's their down payment. Like the bank says how much you're putting down. They already did.
Yeah, so we're going to cover this in not next week's show, the week after, in episode 280. But the point is that it's very important to know this language. When they move into a lease option, we'll say it's a $200,000. I just sold a house for $230,000. They gave me $12,000.
Right.
That $12,000 is considered non-refundable option consideration money. In other words, for $12,000, they bought the rights to have, they bought the exclusive rights. So it's just to them to control this property and live in it for 2 years and give themselves a 2-year period to go get a new loan.
Right.
So the $12,000 is a non-refundable option consideration deposit. When they go get their new loan and they send me notification saying, hey, we got a new loan and we want to close in 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I'm going to write a purchase and sales contract that's going to say they bought this house for $230,000 and they gave me a $12,000 deposit, so they only owe $218,000. At that exact point that they sign that purchase and sales contract and I sign that purchase and sales contract, the money goes from being a non-refundable non-refundable option consideration to a deposit on the house.
That makes a lot of sense because it's not a deposit when they give it to you.
Right.
It's only if they stay in the house and finalize the deal and get the loan. Big difference. Right. Otherwise, you can't. If you said it's a deposit, they would want it back or something. But
it would change the legal. Would change the legal aspect of it. So the point is that the non-refundable option consideration money is non-refundable. Yep. So the only place that they can get that money is to go to a closing and switch it from non-refundable option consideration money to a deposit on the house.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what we do, and we have talked about this a lot recently, I don't know why, but what I do, when I say we, I mean my staff, what I do is I make them give me, like Sean, who's one of my partners, he's a big, he's 26 years old, he's a big computer guy, you do everything on the computer. So I prefer to not do that, although he does do it, and we take pictures of bank accounts and stuff like that. But I prefer they give me a certified money order. This way here, I could take a photocopy of it, and in 2 years from now, when I write that purchase and sales contract, I can provide the bank with evidence at the purchase and sales contract when they gave me the money. It's got the certified check number on there. They can go to the bank, they can look at it. It's very verifiable. And in the bank world, they love that shit.
Is it any weird that it's 2 or 3 years old?
No.
It's okay.
No. Yeah. All right. Okay. So money now. Now we know this because we've talked about this like over and over and over again. So I'm only covering it because maybe there's a new listener right now. But think of this: money now, money now, money now. It could also be extra money you borrow from your private lender. Like, for example, I had that property in Clinton. I paid $115. I borrowed $125. It was worth $275 or $260, $265 or $275. I borrowed $125,000. So that means I had $15,000 extra money in the deal. Mm-hmm. And my ratio was still good. I was still like 41% loan to value ratio or something like that.
Yeah.
I spent some of that money. I spent $5,000 or $6,000 of that money doing cleanup, but I kept $7,000 or $8,000 of money. That's money now.
Sure.
Right.
You can overborrow and keep some.
Right. Well, I didn't overborrow. I want to be careful when you say that. I overborrowed for what I needed, but I didn't overborrow from what my capabilities were. I mean,
no, not for the property, just for the bare minimum. You didn't borrow the bare minimum. You borrowed I borrowed cushion money. Cushion money, because I remember the property. It needed a bit of cleanup and stuff. You just cleaned it out.
I can tell you that one of the things about me is I like games. Now, I'm not a sports guy, but I like to play games. So
I call them real games, real life.
Real game. Yeah, exactly. So I'll set a goal like, okay, so I got an extra $15,000 here. How can I be clever about this and keep as much of that money as possible?
Yeah.
Yet get everything done. Now, I'm not talking about cheaping out, like not doing things. I'm just talking about being clever.
Sure.
Right? Like using a different dumpster company and saving $300 or hiring 2 crews instead of 1 crew.
To do the job faster?
That's a big thing, yes. If you hire one guy, he does step 1 and then does step 2 because he's only got so many guys working for him.
Yeah.
But you can hire 2 or 3 guys and they all can do the work in 3 days instead of 3 weeks. Right? Now you have less holding costs.
Do you do inside guys and outside guys?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to paint and stuff like that. So that's another way money now. How about this one? We talk about it, but never at money now, right? So how about this one? You get 3 months worth of rent free from your seller.
Mm.
And then you put a buyer in there in 3 weeks and you get an extra 2 months worth of rent.
Yeah. So you tell the seller you're not paying the rent for 2-3 months, and the buyer shows up and pays the rent, then you get to keep it.
Right. Well, if you put somebody in there 3 weeks, then you've used up, it took you 3 weeks, you've already used up one of the rents that were for free. So you got 2 more rents left. You could prorate it, but I don't. Right. So you got 2 months worth of rent. So if the rent is like my property I just sold last week was $1,770. So that's what, $3,500 or $3,600 worth of free money. That's money now. So if they're going to give me $10,000 down, plus I get 2 months worth of rents, that's $13,000 or $14,000. That's money now.
Sure is.
So when I'm talking to the seller, when do I get that money? When do I get the money now? How do I get the money now? By negotiating with the seller and telling them I don't want to make the first 3 months worth. So like, for example, we're in November now, right? November 2021, right? We're negotiating with the seller and I know I want to get a little extra money from money now because I'm thinking about how I'm going to sell. I say to the seller, okay, look, we're going to close on December 1st. But I'm not going to make a payment until, I'm not going to make December 1st. I'm not going to make January 1st or February 1st. The first payment I'm going to make is March 1st. Right? And you negotiate that point. And the way that I do that is well, first of all, when they got their mortgage originally, right?
Yeah.
They didn't have to pay until 30 or 45 days later, right? Mm-hmm. They had 30 to 45 days because the way the banking laws are is they can't pay, they can't charge you interest unless you use the money first.
Right. They can't charge in advance. So you have to live in the house for the 30, 31 days.
Well, it's not even live in the house. You have to use the money for 30 days or 45 days before they can charge interest. Yeah. So they'll be like, yeah, that's correct. Well, that's catching up to you now because that 30 days that you had, so the mortgage is always behind. See, rents are before, mortgages are behind. Mm-hmm. Right. So get that. So if you get the rent from your seller, the rent from your buyer, and you don't have to pay your seller, that's a profit center.
Yeah.
Because you get the rent from the seller deduction, right? And then you pick up the money from your buyer.
And it's a month ahead then.
Right. So that gap is a profit center.
Well, that helps you from pulling money out of your pocket to pay things too.
Right. It gives you a chance to sell. And that's the reason why we put it there. So it becomes a challenge. Okay, so I've got 3 months worth of free rent. How quick can I put somebody in here and how much money can I make? And
I know you've done it, but I don't remember exactly how you get away with it. Because, most people say, I don't want to pay for 3 months. Like, no way. Do you just tell them that it might take that long to find the buyer?
Right. So the only reason why I would do that, and this is not what this podcast is about, but the only reason why I would do that is so the first month they're going to pay automatically anyways because it's 30 days behind. So we're going to get 1 month already just by default.
Yeah.
And then what I'll say to them is, well, because this is a big one. This is big. Because I'm paying all the closing costs, I need to recoup some of that money. So I need some time to be able to go find someone. So give me a couple extra months because, you're saving $15,000 in closing costs. So I just want you to make the next 2 mortgage payments and it'll make up for that.
Oh, that's a good one.
Or you could just say, I'm nervous about it because blah, blah, blah. Or I'm paying too much money. So I'm nervous about finding a buyer. So blah, blah, blah. Okay. So that's money now. We're spending too much time on that. Money monthly, right? Money monthly is usually the difference between the buyer's monthly payment and your expenses. Okay. That's normally what we mean by cash flow or money monthly. Okay. But it could also be, which I do a lot of recently, it also could be down payment assistance money. Like, for example, Sean just sold a property and it's a $260,000 property. and she put down 10 grand, which is not enough.
Yeah.
And she's got a 2-year lease, and she promised to pay the other 10 grand over 2 years. So right now we have a $700 or $680 a month positive cash flow between the mortgage and what we're paying and what we're collecting. Mm-hmm. So what I did is I created a down payment assistance program, meaning simply that we divided the 10 grand by 24 months, and it came out to be $416. So that's down payment assistance money. That's our profit. So we get $416 a month on top of the $700. So now all of a sudden it's $1,100 or $1,200 deal per month for 24 months.
That's nice,
right? So that's what we mean by monthly, right? The other way you can get monthly money is a lot of times we'll get properties where you can rent out a garage, like you just break out the garage spaces. Right? Or you can rent out a basement for storage, or an attic, like an attic over a garage for storage spaces.
Yeah.
Right? To somebody else, or add additional money to the buyer. Mm-hmm. Right? These are all money monthly. So when you're buying the property, you have to take these things in consideration. Right? Then you have money later. Money later is often your equity or profit when the deal cashes out or gets paid off from your buyer, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like I paid $230,000, right? I'm sorry, I paid $200,000. I sold for $230,000. When they go cash you out, you're going to get your $230,000 minus the deposit money. So you're going to get $218,000. So your later money would be the $18,000, right?
Yeah.
Did I go too fast?
A little bit. If you don't know it, well, because you paid $200,000 for the house. You sold it for $230,000, so you think, oh, I got $30,000 profit. Well, kind of, yes, but you already got $12,000 in advance.
Right.
So there's $18,000 more at the end.
Right.
Total 30, right. Some now, some later.
Yeah.
As long as you get it.
Right. So now watch this. So money later, we don't talk about this enough, but what about the principal reduction that your tenant is paying for you? So the tenant is paying $1,770 a month. I'm paying my mortgage payment. Well, every time I make my mortgage payment, there's some sort of a principal reduction: $100, $200, $500, $1,200, whatever it is, depending on where the mortgage is.
Yeah.
Right. So there's principal reduction. Like, for example, I just sold 2 properties, and I added in my lease option agreement. I added in my option agreement that I would get the principal reduction. One property, I was in it for 3 years. One property, I got back $24,000 and change in principal reduction. So that's extra money that was in the deal. It was $24,000 and I think $870 or something like that in the deal, because I added one sentence to the agreement. Yeah. Because when I made the deal, and this is what my point is, when I made the deal, I added that profit center in there because I was thinking about the cash out later on and where am I going to get money. So it made me think of that when I made the deal. And that's what the point of this podcast is, right? I had another property. It was $22,000 and $600 or $700. So that's $50,000, 50 something $1,000 this year on properties I bought 3 years ago that the money's in my checkbook. Or it's where it belongs. The money, I had the money because I added those sentences when I was doing the deal structuring, because I know that these profit centers are there. And these are not things you're going to learn on your first deal. As you go through and you do more and more deals, you learn these little nuances and you add them to your way of doing business, and it just keeps building and building and building. Right?
Makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so another money later option, or another money later choice that you could make, and I do this. I don't talk about this very much because I think some people would think it would be derogatory and not fair, which is not true, but it's just the way it's communicated. So a lot of times we do what we call double mortgages, right? So what that means is you have a subject to property that, let's say it's worth $200, they owe $120, and you pay $140. Mm-hmm. So you take over the mortgage payment of the $120, right? And then you owe them $20 grand.
Right.
So the way I would do that is I wouldn't give them the $20 grand. I would tell them that I'll write a note for the $20 grand no payments, no interest. In other words, they get paid when I get paid. When I get the 20 grand, they get the 20 grand.
Yeah,
so when my buyer performs and gets a new loan, that's when they get the money.
Mm-hmm.
However, I have found probably 60 or 70% of those people, actually a bigger number than that. I think I've never really done an actual analysis. It's just a guess. But a vast majority of those people, you get a year or two down the road, and you can call that seller up and say, hey, that $20,000 note, I have $5,000 in cash. Would you be willing to take that money by Friday and give me a lien release? And a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush, is the saying, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times they'll say yes.
Yeah, because that's the only money they're getting from the deal now, because you're paying the mortgage off, and the only thing they're getting is that 20,000, which they're waiting, right?
Right. Well, it's surprise money for them. So they'll think in their head, oh, well, I could pay off Christmas, or I could go on vacation, or I could pay off this, blah, 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 right? So, or they may not say that I'll take 5,000. Well, how much will you take, right? Well, I'll take 10,000. Well, I can do 7,500. You negotiate.
Yeah.
Point is that you either closed on another deal, or this deal is closing and you're just trying to negotiate the loan.
Mm-hmm.
Now watch this. You ready? This is a total, like, I hope I don't create any support tickets with this, because I'm not going to drone on about this at all. Here's another strategy. Suppose you say to them, it's collateral swapping is what it is. So suppose you say to them, I'll give you 5,000 for your $20,000 note, and they say, well, I don't know. I'll just hold the note, wait for the 20 grand. I'm cool. I'm ready. Right. And you got the house sold, right?
Yeah.
So here's what you do. You say, well, how about I collateralize that 20 grand with another house that's worth more than your house? And they'll be like, sure, because they got 2 more years to pay it off, right? So they'll be like, okay, I'll wait the other 20 years, and it doesn't matter to me, what the collateral is, if my house or another house, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So
now what happens is you do your closing with your buyer, you got 20 grand in the closing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have to pay that seller,
mm-hmm.
right? You just built him in as a hard money lender.
Right. And now he's getting some interest on it because you're more like borrowing it by switching it.
No. I mean, I'll do that if I have to. I just swapped it. No, he's in better position because usually the house I'm buying has more equity in it than his does.
Mm-hmm. So it's safer.
Yeah. But you could do that. You could pay interest. I mean, all that stuff is in the conversation. My point is that's money later. Knowing that all that stuff is in the background, and I know that I'm kind of vomiting on everybody right now with all these different strategies, and that's not what I'm trying to do. My point is if you look at these strategies, and as you go through your career, you'll add these strategies to more and more deals. You're not going to do all these your first deal. You're not going to realize that all these are available to you until you start going through the deals, which is why I enjoy the training so much, because the more times over the materials, the more ideas I get on how to do these types of strategies, and I add them to my system.
Yep.
Right. How's my internet? Is it okay?
Yeah.
So far? Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. So
I froze once. I'm not sure if that was me or you, but had a little freeze and I came right back. So we're better today than last time.
Good. So you see, once I start to look at these potential ways to get the money, the deal starts to formulate in my mind, because I'm starting with the income first. Right? So many students of mine have trouble with what deal structure do I use. And if you can't do that, because it's kind of like an open-ended question. Like what kind of food should I eat? Well, there's so many variables.
Yeah.
Unless you break it down to, well, I'm in the mood for meat. Okay, what kind of meat? Steak, beef or pork,
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean? It narrows it down. Well, I actually feel like having beef. Okay, what kind of beef? You kind of narrow it down. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, oh, well, do you want ground beef? You want a nice steak? You want a little less nice of a steak? Do you want ribs? There's only so many pieces of a cow that you're going to eat, right? So it narrows it down. This is what it's like with me when I'm making deals. It's like I'm narrowing down the way that I'm going to sell the property. Okay. Okay. So let's move on. Here is the magic, and how from today forward, we can take any novice real estate investor and turn them into a pro practically overnight. Okay. When we're talking to sellers from an acquisition manager's position, in other words, the buyer for the company, the person that buys the properties for the company, okay, you have to use these 4 numbers to make every deal. If you don't use these 4 numbers, you're not doing deal structuring. You're winging, you're guessing. Okay. So here they are. Number 1, you have to negotiate the best price the seller is willing to give you or willing to accept.
Yeah.
So the best price, it doesn't mean the lowest price, it means the best price. Okay.
No, I actually had a question on that because I was looking at some of our scripts. And I've seen sometimes what's the least you would take, and I see like what's the best price. So is there a difference you can explain briefly? The best and the least?
So the best price is the best price for the deal, meaning if he's stuck on his price and doesn't want to give you a discount, then you just stretch the term out. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So it's the best price because even though you're paying $200 for a property that's worth $180, you can get better terms monthly.
Okay.
Because you stretch it out. So that's the best price. Where if it's a cheaper number, then yeah, that's good, but now you got to give something back. It's a give and take world. If he gives you something, you got to give something back, right?
Yeah.
So the first thing we do is we negotiate the best price the seller's willing to accept. Right? If they're willing to take monthly payments, what's the lowest payment they'll accept each month? That's number 2. Number 3, if they're willing to take payments, how long will they wait to get paid off?
Yeah.
Right? This is the term or the time you can pay monthly before paying the seller off. Right? And then number 4, does he feel like he doesn't know you? And this is risky enough doing this deal that he should get skin in the game. How many times we hear that from you, the buyer, called a deposit. So if you haven't done a good job of building confidence and making them feel like you're going to pay, or that it's kind of like a scammy deal because of the way you're presenting it, they're going to want what they call skin in the game. They want to make sure you have something at risk so you're not going to walk away. It's a ball and chain effect.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I got you in my cave behind the bars and I'm going to feed you dinner, lunch, and breakfast every day. So you got to do what I tell you to do, which is pay me every month. Right? Which, by the way, this often comes from acquisition managers who ask or beg for deals. Instead of saying, this is how we normally do it. Right? And saying it with confidence. See, I don't ask my sellers what they're willing to do. I ask them what they're willing to do when I'm doing the discovery stage, but when I'm making the offer, I don't ask them what to do. I say, this is how we normally do it. And I say, bam. You see the difference? So once I do discovery, I'm going to ask my questions in discovery so I can get a picture of how I can sell this property. So the discovery stage is really a vision of how I could sell this property. And when I sell this property, I'm gonna give my seller everything they need from my buyer. So the buyer is going to produce what they need. And that could be a rehab retail deal, that could be a wholesale deal, it could be a lease option deal, it could be any one of those. But at the end of the day, my buyer is going to pay for and take responsibility for the obligations that I'm making today with my seller.
So the way I'm getting this is what you get in discovery, you know what you can do and what you should do. and you shouldn't budge from that. So you present it that way.
Well, you can budge from it, but you have to be matter of fact. See, in fact, when I researched this lack of confidence and conviction thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I found.
Mm-hmm.
The acquisition manager themselves would not do the deal that they're proposing.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a hidden disagreement in the proposal.
Oh, yeah.
And there's back off. They're not saying it with conviction.
Yeah. It's hard to ask somebody to do something you're not willing to do yourself and really believe it. That's
right.
hard.
Right. So that's the biggest reason why I have students that don't have this conviction. Like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pay you $230,000, but I'm not going to make the mortgage payments. I'm not going to pay you the first month's. I'm not going to pay you your first month's rent until March of 2022.
Yeah.
I don't say, would you be willing to wait till March of 2022? It's here's the offer. I'll pay you the $230,000, which is $10,000 more than I want to pay. Only if you're willing to, or only if you're going to let me make a payment on March 1st. I'll make my first payment on March 1st. It's not forceful, but it's very stern.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about personally, because when I started, and I think I see it in some of the other coaching students that we work with and I talk to, you see some of their conversations. You get this feeling like they're hearing what the seller wants to do, and us rookie type people are going, gee, how can I do what he wants me to do? And that's not the way it works. I remember sitting in a house with you and the guy was pitching really good. Like he wanted this, he wanted that. And we're thinking, gee, how can we do that? And we both looked at each other like, nope, here's what we do. Right. And you have to know the difference between that. It's not what they want. I mean, you find out what they want in discovery and you try to present that. But at that point, there's a way that we do the business, and that's how we do it. The numbers can move a little bit, but no, it can't be just what they want. That's not how it works. Relationships should be like, everything should be like that.
So the thing is I wrote this in one of my books, is that there's only one person that has to agree with the deal, and that's the seller.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think of it this way. You go onto Amazon, right?
Yeah.
I did this last night at 10 o'clock after I got done with the meetup. I promised my wife. So because I'm in Florida and she's in Connecticut, we get on a Zoom call, right? And we're looking for Christmas gifts for the grandkids. So here's what happens. My granddaughter's 1.5 years old and loves baby dolls.
Yeah.
Right. So I type into the Amazon search, baby dolls for a 2-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is no different than talking to a seller. Would you be willing to take $200,000?
Mm-hmm.
It's like typing into Amazon. So I get a bunch of results based on that question in the search engine.
Yeah.
Right. So now I have to go through the results and I have to look at, okay, so what do I want? What do I want to do? And where my wants come from is, how am I going to sell? So at the end of the day, and we're going to go over these in a couple minutes, but at the end of the day, here's the most impactful thing that I think I can say about selling a house. I talk about this in the deal meeting. In our flow, it's in the deal meeting. And here's what happens when you're looking at a house and you're trying to decide on not the motive, because it goes texting, opening caller, closing caller, and then deal meeting. That's the flow, right?
Yeah.
The opening caller proposes what could happen and then gets a memorandum or something in writing before they go to the deal meeting. Once you go to the deal meeting, what happens is you've finished dealing with the customer's motivation. Now you need to go into the house and qualify the house, because you've already qualified the seller. So now you're going to go qualify the house. So how do you qualify a house? And most people think, well, you go in and you look at how much it needs for repairs and it needs for this and location and all that kind of stuff. No, that's all bullshit, because that's very subjective, because you're going to have one opinion of what a house should be and I'm going to have another. Right? We're all going to have our own opinions. Opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one, right? It's just how it goes, Yes. So the point that I make is that the way you look at a house is how popular will that property be with your buyers? How many buyers do you think you could attract to this property? And it reduces or gets thwarted by dysfunction, like a 5,000 square foot house with one bedroom, or the neighborhood is like in the ghetto, so that thwarts how popular this will be with buyers. Right.
I like that you use the word popular, because it really says it. It's just popular.
Right. So the more popular it is, the more. So in other words, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, so it's like if I have to pay $20,000 for a deposit on a $200,000 house, how popular, how many people am I going to find? How many buyers am I going to find? They got 20,000 plus, so I can make some money too.
Right.
So I stop it in the tracks with the seller by saying, no, we're not giving you 20,000. And here's the reason why. One of my profit centers is the difference between what I have to pay you for a deposit and what I can get for a deposit from my buyer. And I'm not going to find somebody with 20 grand down. So we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Right. But I know that in the transaction. So when he originates that communication, I want 20 grand, I go right back at it and say, no, can do. Here's the reason why. Because I know what my seller is willing to do now. Now I have to look at, will the buyer be willing to do that? How many buyers can I find that are willing to do that? Is it popular or not popular? Am I looking for a needle in a haystack, or am I going to have a house that, like I just sold, I put on Facebook Marketplace, and in 7 days I had over 300 responses, and I had 12 applications. That's a popular house, right? Instead of 6 months ago, Sean and I sold a 2-bedroom in Windsor, and we had in a 7-day period, we had 75 people, and we had 2 applications. Or 3 applications. It wasn't a popular house. It was a 2-bedroom house.
Yeah, that's that big a difference from 2-bed to 3-bed, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let me give you some examples. Okay. So before we scoot out here. So actually, let me back up. So in fact, in the fact finding section, the discovery stage, once I feel the seller has revealed his or her true emotions, which is the motivation, their emotions, driving this deal, I then start to envision a strategy that would solve and fund all of the seller's needs and wants. So I need to discover what are their needs and wants, what are their go buttons, and then how popular is it for me to go find a buyer to obligate to those solutions. I'm a matchmaker, right? I know what the seller's problems are. Now I need to go see how many buyers would be willing to do that, to help this seller. How many buyers would be willing to only do a 1-year lease? Not enough. How many buyers would be willing to pay, $20,000 for a down payment? Not enough. How many buyers would want to come into this 2-bedroom house in the ghetto? Not enough. Right? So that's how I look at the deals. I have bounced them off. So let me give you an example. An example would be my seller is insisting on getting $2,500 a month for moving money.
Yeah.
Right. But is willing to let the mortgage stay in his name until I can pay him off. So in my mind, it drifts to a subject to deal because he's willing to leave the mortgage in his name.
Sure.
Right? Where can I get a minimum of $5,000 to $7,000 from my buyer? Is that possible? Right? Is it a $60,000 house and I'm looking for 10% down, or is it a $200,000 house where I'm actually looking for, $5,000 to $7,000, and normally I'm going to ask 5%, which is 10 grand.
Yep.
Right. So it's like I got a pretty good shot at getting $5,000 to $7,000 because I'm going to ask 10 grand, and the likelihood I'm going to get it is pretty high. Because it's 5% down, right? So that means that giving the seller $2,500 out of that 5 to 7 or 10 grand is very doable. It's not going to be an unpopular move, right?
No,
if he really
needs that to leave the house to do the deal to make the rest of the money you're going to make is totally worth it.
Right.
Because you look at the big picture, the money now, the money later, the money monthly, looking at all of that, And that's one of the things I learned from you. It's not just, well, I'm only getting 5,000. Do I want to give them 25? No, you're not getting 5,000. You're getting 5,000, then money monthly, and the money later. Look at the entire deal, all the money, and then do the math. Then see if it's worth it. A little bit of patience, you'll make some money.
Right. So in this particular case, not only am I going to be able to get the $5,000 or $7,000 from my buyer, but am I going to be able to convince my buyer to do to pay the monthly mortgage payment. So if the monthly mortgage payment is correct, then I can do that. And then I also want to make sure that my buyer is going to take responsibility or obtain the repairs and maintenance. Right. That's another thing. Right. So if I'm looking at a house and it needs a new furnace and needs $6,000, is my buyer going to want to absorb that? Where's that money coming from? Right. Or it needs a new roof. Right. Because there's a tarp on the roof. So I start thinking to myself, okay, so a new roof is $9,000. Where does that money come from? Is my buyer going to be, so it changes my strategy. So maybe I don't do a lease option deal here. Maybe I do a rehab retail, so it changes my offer now.
Yeah.
Because of the $9,000. Where am I going to get the $9,000? Right? Even if you're going to go get private money and do a rehab retail, at the end of the day, your buyer is going to cash everybody out.
Sure.
Your buyer is going to pay your rehab cost. Your buyer is going to pay your private money lender. Your buyer is going to pay the interest you paid your private lender. Your buyer is going to pay all your closing costs. They're going to pay everything. They're going to cash you out. So you have to look at how popular is this house in this strategy with my buyer. Right?
Sure. I think one of the best things you're doing with all this, I'm sure anybody, especially in the beginning of this kind of business, is going to worry, if I buy this, can I sell it?
Right.
It's one thing to buy it, but if you're nervous about selling it, how are you going to buy it? You can't perform yourself.
Well, that's what my point.
And just to maybe finish, if you teach us how to look at all the the money monthly, all that coming in, it helps figure out what to do in the beginning, so you're not so nervous about doing it because you know where you're headed. And you do this kind of automatically in your head from experience, but explaining it to us should make it easier for us to figure out what to do, so we're not nervous about doing it. So it fits the exit and how are you going to sell it.
Right. So if I had to go buy a brand new car today and my dad said, I'm going to give you $10,000 to go buy a new car, and I've got $3,000 in my savings account. I know I can spend $13,000. So now when I go to the car dealership, I know I have $13,000 already.
Yeah.
And I start negotiating based on that $13,000. So I'm going to buy a car that's worth $23,000. Do I want to pay $200 a month for that extra $10,000 for the next 5 years?
Yeah.
Or do I want to buy a car that's $10,000 and keep my $3,000? You see, so the mindset of how you're going to purchase is a reverse engineer of how you're going to purchase that property, because you already know where the money's coming from.
Yeah.
So that's my point is it's backwards, because just what you said, too many students get stuck on how am I going to buy this property? They're looking for clever ways to buy the property when actually, if you look at what the seller is requiring of you to be able to say yes and sign the documents, you then match that up against how am I going to find, when I sell it, am I going to be able to do this? So how does that structure the deal? What's the best deal strategy for me to do that?
Yeah. So
should I just go for the gusto? I mean, this thing needs, $10,000 worth of work. I mean, it needs a roof, and it needs, the hot water heater's not working, and the kitchen is horrendous. I think it'll knock down the popularity. Oh my goodness, I need $30,000 to fix this thing. Well, you're not doing a rent to own. You're not doing a lease option. You're probably not doing subject to unless his numbers are really low.
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, so the only way I could sell this is if I fix all this stuff. All right. Yeah. So now your offer reflects that. You do the rehab retail. You do the Mayo formula. ARV, after renovated value, times 70% minus repairs, and it just kind of shoehorns you into how to make the offer, because you know where you got to get the money from. The only way you're going to get this thing paid off is if you fix the roof, if you fix the kitchen, and you fix the furnace. Otherwise, you're not going to. The popularity of this house when you go to sell it is going to be horrible. Or you buy the house at such a low discount, you can just go wholesale it to a guy that can do that work.
Sure.
But you got to look at where's the money coming from. How am I going to sell this thing first? Right? So now let's look at the same deal we were just talking about. But the seller says they want a lawyer to look at the documents. So they're willing to do subject to, they're willing to let you take over the payments, they're willing to do all this stuff, but they're willing to look that now they're like, I want a lawyer to look at all the documents. Now, I need to keep my exit strategy the same. I'm going to rent it to own. I'm going to put a lease option person in there, and I'm going to do all my numbers. I know for a fact when I sell on a lease option, it's going to be to the 81% of the population that doesn't qualify for a mortgage.
Yeah.
And they're willing to pay 5 or 10% more for the property than they normally than anybody paying cash. Right? Mm-hmm. It's always, that's just the American way, right? If you pay cash, you get a discount. If you finance, you don't get a discount. Right? Yep. That's just the American way. I didn't make that up. So we know we can get 5 to 10% more for the property because we're going to sell it on a lease option, lease with an option to purchase. But now here's what happens. And this is the punchline of this podcast for my coaching clients that are listening to me right now. What paperwork do you use?
Mm-hmm.
So we know that the subject to, the lawyer looks at it, and the likelihood of the lawyer is saying, you shouldn't do that. You're not protected. You're going to do what? You're going to give the deed to your house and keep the mortgage in your name. Okay, did I come back?
I hear you now.
Okay, good.
Now you're moving. Okay, good.
Okay, good. Yeah, I saw the little thing up there. The first time I've ever seen it is the internet line there for some reason popped up. So you can hear me?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, good. So here's what happens. So your lawyer is going to say, "Oh, you're going to put the deed in somebody else's name, and the mortgage is still in your name." At face value, it sounds like a risky deal. Only because
that he wouldn't do, right?
Yeah,
personally, he wouldn't do it.
Right, exactly right. So the point that I'm making here is that if you actually understood property trust, which 99% of all attorneys do not understand them, they don't know what a property trust is, and I have to educate them all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So a property trust is just taking ownership of the deed. That's all it's doing in a trust format.
Yeah.
So you have to switch the paperwork now. So instead of doing a subject to deal, you could still do the same transaction, but instead do something like a wraparound mortgage. What that means is you're gonna take the money that you owe the seller and the money they owe the bank, and you're gonna put them in the same document and make payments.
Yeah, that's like the example when the mortgage might be 120 you owe, and they wanted 20,000 more. So there's the mortgage at 120 plus 20 that the equity should go to the seller. So now it's 140, and you make two mortgages out of those two separate things. I mean, one mortgage out of the two.
Yeah, you make one mortgage out of the two mortgages. So you're gonna combine the 120 and the 140. I mean, the 120 and the 20,000, and have a note with the seller for 140. Now it looks like it's owner finance. Because it's the way they are.
Yeah.
So my point is that when I know what my exit strategy is, I can not only, and I know how I'm going to sell, I can not only know how to make the offers, but then I start looking at how.
Cool.
I'm back now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you're wondering how I would use a chat, a link, so you can go check out my documents. You got to pay for them, but you got to go look at them, right? And if you go to the link in the description, it will take you to them, and it'll show you where they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, did this help at all, Peter, or is it too profound?
No, I think the thing that helped most, there's a lot of examples in there, but the thing is, when the new person, rookie, whoever is looking at some of their first deals and wondering if they should buy it, well, you have to sort out how you would sell it. And if you can see that, then you're not going to be so nervous. And you have to know that when you do the rent to own lease options, a lot of people, it was 300 that you got. It was too many for you. You didn't like it. It was too many.
Yeah, I won't do that again.
A lot of people do. Yeah. Well, the way you advertise it, you pulled in some extra riffraff, but people do show up for this. The few I've done is like a lot of people call. So if you know that, you don't have to be nervous going in to make the purchase. And besides, it's not an option that you're not responsible for the whole thing anyways. But still, you know, we're going to be nervous about whatever. If you know you can sell, it's going to be okay. It's less to worry about. Just do it.
Well, the more confidence you have on selling it, the better off you can do to negotiate. So the missing piece is looking at how can I sell this thing and how confident am I that I can sell it, and that makes you that much stronger on making your offers.
Yeah, I think we might do this subconsciously. Like I remember getting talking to somebody with a condo. I said, "What's the rent?" She said, "What's the mortgage? $2,000." Wait a minute, $2,000 for a condo? I said, "How'd you do that?" 15-year mortgage. I go, oh boy. And I'm thinking, how am I gonna sell that? It's too much. But the way you're saying it, we should think about it consciously going in, not just as a knee-jerk reaction to something you don't like. Right. How am I going to solve it? Just knowing going in, you do this, on the sell side, then you can think more clearly on the buying from the seller.
Which is why the 4 things that we need as an acquisition manager so much. You need to negotiate the price, the payments, the term, and deposit, because those are the 4 things you need to look at on when you go to sell. Are you going to be able to get those back?
Yeah.
Right, which is the money now, money monthly, money later.
I think what makes it a little bit more complex is that if it was just buying and selling something, like I bought a few cars from you to sell. We knew how much they would sell for, so I know how much I should pay you. We both knew that. So I buy something for $900 and sell it for $1,300, $1,400, or $1,500. It's cut and dry. We have 3 elements or 4 elements in this that add layers to it that we have to consider. But it's the same idea. What will it go for? What will I get it for?
Yep.
So I think both ends. So now even you're going to be doing it more consciously.
Yeah. I have an idea that I want to go over with you later that I think might be a new innovation to this business. I have a really strong idea on how I'm going to help my coaching clients.
Good. Yeah.
I got this really, really cool idea that's so simple it's pathetic.
Wow.
So we'll talk about that later. Anyways, we're going to get out of here for now. Thank you for listening. Make sure you go into the description and click on the link and see what I have in there for you. Please, 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 please give us a review. Make sure you subscribe to our channel wherever you're listening to us, either on any of the podcast channels or in YouTube or Facebook or any one of those. Just subscribe to us so you know what we're doing. And we're over and out. We'll see you next week. Next week, if you're live and you're in the United States, is Thanksgiving, so we will still be. It'll be a pre-recorded recording, but we will be doing a regular event. So if you're up Thanksgiving morning and you want to have a cup of coffee and a cigar with us, then we'll be here.
Yeah, listen in, then watch the parade and the Thanksgiving stuff.
There you go. All right, guys, over and out. Thanks for all your support and all your help. Okay. See you next week.